Good afternoon, members, and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Lincolnshire Health and Wellbeing Board. Can we please look at agenda item 1, which is election of chairman? Can I ask for any nominations, please? Councillor Bokit.
Thank you. I'd like to nominate Councillor Sue Woolley. She's done an excellent job over the last few years, and I'm sure she'll continue with the good work. Thank you.
Is there a seconder for that nomination, please? Councillor Bradwell. Okay, are there any further nominations? Okay, so it's proposed and seconded that Councillor Woolley becomes the chairman of the Lincolnshire Health and Wellbeing Board for 23-24. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, anyone against? Anyone abstained? That's carried then. Thank you very much. If you'd like to come and take your seat, Councillor Woolley.
Thank you for your confidence, colleagues. Can we move on to item 2, the election of the Vice Chairman? I'd like to invite nominations for the post of the Vice Chairman for 22-23. I would like to propose John Turner. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Bradburn? Thank you. Are there any further nominations? All those in favour, please raise your hands. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you. John, would you like to join me? Okay, can we now move on to item 3, apologies for absence. Katrina.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Marfleet, Councillor Rawlins, Sir Andrew Cash, but we have Jerry McSorley here on his behalf, Dr. Kevin Thomas, Elaine Bayliss, Kevin Lockyer, but we have Sharon Robson here on his behalf, Philip Clark, Dean O'Dell, and Professor Neil Juster, but we do have James Beattie here on his behalf. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Katrina. Moving on to a declaration of members' interest, can I ask if there are any members who have declarations of interest they wish to declare? I'll take that as a no. And now we move on to item 5, which is minutes of the previous meeting. I'm assuming that everyone's read the minutes, and can we confirm them? Is there a proposer, please? Anyone who was here at the last meeting? Don't be shy. Yes, you can. Thank you. A seconder, please. Somebody who was here at the last meeting. Thank you, Councillor Gray. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Just wait for poor Katrina, because she's trying to do 6 things at once here. That's all right. So it was just Councillor Kendrick who was abstaining.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Action updates, item 6, and that is purely for noting. Anyone have any comments?
Just, may I? Just on the major conditions strategy, just to check, Derek, if we...
That's item 7.
Oh, sorry, Chair.
Keep up. Right. Moving on to items, do we need to agree the
Just a show of hands, you're all in agreement, Chairman?
with that agenda item 6, that is? Thank you. Thank you. Item 7. Again, I'm assuming that you've read these chairman's updates, but John, you have a comment you'd like to make.
A question, if I may, please, Chair. I'll get it right, promise, at some point. On the major conditions strategy, Derek, are we going to be putting anything in from the Lincolnshire perspective to that?
Okay, sorry. I'm happy to collate views from a public health perspective. The Association of Directors of Public Health nationally are feeding in, so I'll feed in through that route. But if we want to put some comments in via the call for evidence from a Lincolnshire level, we can collate those.
I was more just thinking about last time we met, we looked at your annual reports and obviously the rural sort of coastal perspective. So I just wonder if there's anything that we might want to just put in from our local dimension. Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
If I can, although I'm a bit scared now, Chairman. You were nice as pie while you were sat here, now you've got all bossy again. So. It's on the COVID-19 item, if I can ask a question. On number 7, it's on your papers, Chairman. It's on the spring update. Yeah, I'd just like to ask, obviously I ask on behalf of the districts, it tells us where we are with what the programme is, but what's the uptake? Because there's a bit of concern floating around at the moment, because most of us know somebody or have actually been quite ill with COVID. There's a lot of it, people are still getting quite ill, but there seems to be a general conversation out at the moment about it not being so bad now, and people don't seem so bothered, and nobody seems to really know which dosage we're now on. I know somebody who's on number 6, and other people are saying whether they've had 3 or 4. So it seems to have sort of lost its way with the messaging, that a lot of people don't seem to fully understand what's going on or seem bothered about whether they should be going for their booster or not. So I just wondered what the uptake's been, and is there a way forward of trying to reinvigorate people's sort of maybe faith and interest in it, because it seems to have waned slightly.
Yeah, shall I talk about the update? And Derek, you might want to say a few words just about sort of the broader public health issues. Of course, the spring campaign isn't sort of a generalised one across the whole population. It is pointed at certain groups within the population: care home residents, elderly, people who are immunosuppressed, all of that, who generally get notified personally and invited to make an appointment and to attend for their booster. So the promotion of it, so to speak, is much more individualised and personalised to the people who it's pointed at. People will have slightly different numbers of how many they've had over the years, depending on their personal health circumstances, the particular conditions they've got, and so on. So there will be that variation in numbers. I think it's fair to say that it has moved from being a really significant high-profile campaign to being one that's more akin to other vaccination programs we run, and sort of screening programs as well, where it's much more tailored to the needs of certain parts of our population rather than generalised across the whole population. And just to say, in terms of uptake, we monitor that on a weekly basis in the ICB, and the uptake continues to be very strong and comparatively better than most other parts of the country. Thank you.
I can add just an update from last week in terms of the numbers. I've just found it from the COVID Executive Planning Board. We've got 81% uptake in care homes at the moment around the spring booster, and all over 75s is about 70%, probably a bit higher now because this is a week ago, which benchmarking wise, my understanding is puts Lincolnshire near the top of the pile in terms of the Midlands in terms of coverage. I understand the nature of the question, which is that there has been and certainly is evidence nationally of not just for COVID, but actually worryingly across all vaccinations, including the childhood immunisation vaccination schedule, a drop-off in the number of people having vaccines. Just to reiterate, which everybody on the board will know, vaccinations are the single best thing we can do to protect ourselves regardless of the disease. They are safe, they are hugely effective, and I would advise everybody who's eligible to go and get their full vaccine schedule, including all of the COVID side of it. There is one thing to flag up as well, which is the Evergreen offer, so that's people who've not had any COVID vaccines, will be ending towards, I think it's the end of this month, the end of June. So anybody who's not had any COVID vaccine but now wants to, please get in touch. You go on through the online website to book a schedule, because some protection is better than none.
Thank you, Derek. And going back to John's comment about the major conditions strategy, particularly for councillors, this morning there was an LGA call specifically on that piece of work and discussing the LGA's response that will be going back into the consultation and into the call for evidence. The final chairman's announcement that I would like to make, for those of you that I haven't bored so far, yesterday I was delighted, still coming down from it, to be invited to Washington School, and as you probably know, the Princess Royal paid a visit to the school. She's president of the Healthy Eating Foundation, and for those of you that have been to Washington School, primary school, you'll know that they are very into their healthy eating and growing it, and then cooking with it, and all sorts of things. And as I say, at the invitation of the headmaster, I was very fortunate to be invited to go along and meet the Princess Royal, and also then explain exactly how what she was doing yesterday then fitted into our health and wellbeing strategy as far as the obesity priority is concerned. So yeah, okay, I'm bragging a bit, but I'm trying to find a legitimate reason for it as well. Okay, moving on. Now, just for formality, the safety announcement, I'd like to welcome you all, obviously, today to our Health and Wellbeing Board meeting, and including everyone here in the Council Chamber and to those who may be listening online. Before we begin our agenda proper, can I just make sure that those of us that are in the Council Chamber, I was going to say that there's no fire drill planned, but there was a bit of a peep earlier, wasn't there? In the event of it going off and remaining making a noise, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors, through the reception area, and assemble in the car park at the front of the building and await further instructions. Can I please remind everyone to ensure their mobile phones and devices are on silent? And also, when invited to speak, can you please ensure that you switch your microphone on? Otherwise, officers attending the meeting via Teams and members of the press and public won't be able to hear you. If you wish to ask a question during the course of the meeting, can you please raise your hand, and my Vice Chairman will make a note of those wishing to speak. Okay, so our action was then just simply to take a note of the chairman's announcement. All noted? Agreed? Please raise your hands. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to item 8A is the Health and Wellbeing Board terms of reference and the membership review. You will recall that when we first set out, certainly with the Health and Wellbeing Board, that we had a prescribed list of those that had to be obligatory members, and then we added those that we felt would add value to our meeting. Since that time, there have been a number of opportunities to increase the membership, but also decrease as well, in that it's become apparent that some people can wear more than one hat. So we have got to the point where we have decided to renew the membership, and what I would just like to run through with you is that, as you know, from pages 19 to 34, we've got the terms of reference. I'm now going to ask Alison if she will just walk through the report with us and then invite questions from the board. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you. You summarised everything quite nicely there. Thank you. Yes, we have a commitment to review our terms of reference on an annual basis. So obviously, as this is the AGM, we've got to come to that point where we have to do it again this year. So the amended proposed terms of reference are in Appendix A, which start on page 23. So in terms of the functions of the Health and Wellbeing Board and its role, they remain unchanged. So in the appendix, some of the changes that are highlighted there as track changes are just for formality and just to make sure consistency in terminology and things. So in terms of the actual role and function of the board, that remains unchanged. As Councillor Woolley alluded to, we have had some discussions around the membership and making some changes to that. If you remember last year when we set up the Integrated Care Partnership, we agreed to mirror the membership of the ICP with the Health and Wellbeing Board, and at that time we increased the membership to include all the NHS providers and partners and some additional associate members. And we agreed to look again at the membership this year as that arrangement matured. We've come to the point now where we can actually take some of those members out of the membership. I think it's clear that we have the representation from across all the partners. So the proposal is that the County Council reduce its County Council representation by 2 members, and that the health representation is reduced by 4. In terms of associate membership, we are required under the terms of reference to agree associate members on an annual basis. So as you note there on page 20, the proposal is that we continue associate membership for the Lincolnshire Police, the voluntary community sector, the higher education sector, and the Lincolnshire Local Enterprise Partnership and NHS England and Improvement. We'd also like to propose to offer associate membership to someone from the care sector, because we recognise that's a gap currently in not only in the Health and Wellbeing Board membership, but also in the ICP membership. So ask the board to agree the recommendations that are set out at the top of page 19.
Thank you, Alison. Questions? Councillor Bradwell.
I think I should be included with Adult Care and Public Health as an executive councillor, because I'm not, you've missed me off. And I mean, obviously then you've got 3 further county councillors as well, but I usually have been up there. I missed that last year. Because it's
Right.
a Health and Wellbeing Board, so is the health of children as well as adults.
Okay.
What's that say then?
Yeah, you're right at the very bottom.
I've missed that. I've gone here. So apologies if you've got me in. Thank you. But I just get very touchy about sometimes it's all about adults and not about children. Right. Okay. Okay, that's fine. I don't need to come. Yeah, so that's fine.
Okay.
I didn't read that. I was on missing
Okay.
page.
Yeah, but
Okay.
you're comfortable with that, and you're comfortable with the numbers and the way that they've been
Yeah.
allocated.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Pete?
Yeah, it's only a minor one. I think in 5.2 you need to change it to NHSE, as is NHS England. NHSE I don't exist, so.
I see. Yes, that first line. Have you got that, Katrina? Okay, Glenn?
Thank you, Chair. Particularly pleased if the board approves the inclusion as an associate member, representative from the social care sector, which has more beds and more staff than all elements of the NHS combined in Lincolnshire, and therefore is a powerful voice within our community.
Thank you. I agree with you. Any other comments or questions? Anyone? I think we should all be patting ourselves on the back somewhat in this forum, simply because we're able to agree in our playground a nice way to work and play together. I'm afraid, and I that might sound quite flippant. It's not meant to be. It's just that elsewhere, it is not as easy as we make it. And I think it goes without saying that all of the members here go out of their way to make sure that there's a good working relationship with each other. And okay, we have some challenging conversations, but that's the point. We challenge each other robustly, but we do find a way of working, particularly for ourselves in Lincolnshire. So thank you, one and all. Can we move then, if there's no further questions, to the actions required? I'm not going to read them all out, but that we endorse the terms of reference, we agree the proposals for the reduction, we reaffirm the selection of the associate members, and we endorse the recommendation to extend the associate membership to a representative from the care sector. Can you show with your hands if you're in a... Oh, a proposer, please. Thank you, Councillor Bowkett, and thank you, Councillor Wright. Everyone in agreement, please raise your hands. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. We move on to item 8B. Again, this was circulated with the pack, and I am assuming that everyone's read it. So I will hand straight over to Alison and ask her to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you. At our meeting in March, we agreed the joint engagement process for reviewing the joint health and wellbeing strategy and the next iteration of the integrated care strategy. And the approach we've taken is to use the evidence from the newly published JSNA to inform that review, and to use the evidence to reaffirm the current priorities in the strategy, to identify any areas of further concern, and to consider alterations to the priorities within the joint health and wellbeing strategy. We started that by doing a desktop exercise, looking at all the 36 topics in the JSNA and using the matrix that we agreed at the March meeting. The outcome of that desktop exercise is shown on page 49, which mapped all the 36 topics in terms of the burden on the population compared to the progress, so whether it's improving or getting worse. That exercise was completed by our public health intelligence team, and we used that as the basis for some workshops that we've done since the last meeting, to then use that to start a conversation, to have a discussion around whether that felt right, whether the mapping was right, because the mapping is very data-driven, and it was trying to get some of that more nuanced local intelligence into that discussion around whether that's correct or not. Based on the discussions we've had in the workshops, a report was produced, which is in Appendix A, which presents a number of recommendations to the Health and Wellbeing Board on what we should do in terms of the priorities moving forward. We asked a series of questions, and if I may, I'll just quickly run through the recommendations just to make sure we're clear on what was sort of proposed. So first recommendation, when we asked people what they think about the number of priorities we should have in the strategy, there was a clear steer that we didn't want to have any more than 7. So we've currently got 7 in the strategy. So 7 or below was the number that people felt we should have in the strategy. There was a clear consensus that mental health, physical activity and healthy weight should remain high priorities. Both the desktop analysis and the feedback at the workshops put those at top of the pile, as it were. And they are current priorities obviously in our strategy. So the proposal is that they still remain as priorities in the strategy. Dementia was quite an interesting topic in where it was mapped in the desktop exercise, because it didn't, the data suggests it hasn't improved or got worse, and that the burden was sort of about the same, so it's put it right in the middle. And we had quite a lot of discussion around that at the workshops, and people felt that dementia was still an important issue for Lincolnshire, and actually because it's on the cusp, but there's potential, that there's a rationale to retain that as a priority. I suppose the question for the board is whether they want to retain it as a separate priority in its own right, or whether they feel it could be incorporated into the mental health area. So it's mental health and dementia. So again, that's a recommendation the board to consider whether we maintain it as a separate priority. Drugs and alcohol was identified as probably the only area where that appeared high in the ranking and in the discussions. Drugs and alcohol is currently a priority for the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership, and there is a partnership group set up around to deliver that priority. So again, it's a question for the Health and Wellbeing Board, what's the added value of having it as part of the Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy? Is there anything in addition that we can do around that arena? Or are we satisfied that there is already a mechanism and a governance around that? And if there was any discussion that we wanted to have, it's about inviting perhaps the existing arrangements to come and present to the Health and Wellbeing Board rather than setting up our own arrangements under the Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy. Housing is obviously currently a priority, a very important priority in the Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy. It didn't rank very highly in the mapping, other than unsuitable homes. But again, it's an important aspect of our shared agenda. So following discussion with the Housing, Health and Care Delivery Group, the recommendation is that we still maintain housing as a priority, but we change the focus and rebrand it as Homes for Independence rather than having it housing and health. Recommendation 6 is regarding carers. So carers didn't rank very highly at all in the desktop exercise, and there was some support, but not a lot of support to retain it as a priority. But having said that, we know it's an important issue in Lincolnshire. We know we've got an ageing population, we've got a large number of carers, and I think during COVID it just shows that if we hadn't had that carers support, that we would have been in some quite significant difficulty in some of our vulnerable people. So that's the recommendation is for the board to give us a steer on whether we retain it. There's the option there to retain it as a priority. And the final recommendation is that, like the JSNA, we try and take a life course approach in how we set out the strategy and how we articulate the delivery plans around this. So in summary, that's what we're asking.
Discuss. Yes. Okay. Councillor Bradwell.
Yeah. So I have read through this on the right page this time, folks. So my brain's functioning. So firstly, I have to say, you're right about drugs and alcohol. There is so much going on in the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership, and I do think that whether they come once a year or if a small group wants an update on it, obviously Lucy Gavin's in Derek's team very much involved with that as well, and we've got all agencies around the table, and hopefully now we've got all these strategies we have to get put together so that we can work. you know, we will be able to go off and get some, you know, action taken. And we know with drugs and alcohol that is leading on to the other bit of the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership, which is a serious violence, because with serious violence there's mostly drugs and alcohol and all sorts of other things involved as well. So yeah, so that's, I can just assure you, the committee, that is moving on. My bit that I am quite concerned about that is not included in this is children with special educational needs, because there is quite an issue with them actually getting you know, some paediatric services at times. You know, it can be because they've got a physical disability, but it can be autism or something like that. And, you know, we have a growing number of children going into that area, hence why we're building new schools and with additional capacity, so they've not got to go out of county. So I do think, you know, and I'm not just saying this because I do children's, but I do think children's sometimes at the bottom of the pile and not up the top there. So I would just ask if there could be some mention on that, because it is, you know, it is a huge issue, and it is the fact that, you know, sometimes parents are waiting quite a long time to get to see someone who can help their young person, really. So that's the only thing. I know you've mentioned about dementia, and obviously, you know, we don't know when that's going to hit any of us when we get to a certain age. It is a dreadful disease. So, and with having an elderly ageing population, maybe you don't think it should be here, but I think it is. You know, it is something that's growing. It's not reducing. It's growing, and to be honest, there isn't really any, you know, quick fix to it. There's nothing that can stop it. It is about, you know, ensuring, I would have thought, for this county that there is those good wraparound services for people who have dementia, because I can honestly say there isn't at the moment. And I know that from having a family member. So I do think, you know, yes, you can push it down or not be there at all, but, you know, it is growing. And we all know, you know, we're not a county that thrives in producing lots of young people. We thrive in producing older people.
Alison, do you want to respond to Councillor Bradwell?
Other than we'll take the SEND issue away and have a look at that. Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Kendrick.
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, in a similar vein to Councillor Bradwell, I noticed that oral health scores quite low, and I have in my mind about young people and the number of youngsters who are having extractions and so on these days, and also the situation on the East Coast, particularly in relation to fluoridation or the lack of it. I thought it might have scored a bit higher. It's just an observation, Chairman.
Derek.
I think what Alison and the team have tried to do here is get the balance between the competing interests of 7 or less priorities within the health and wellbeing strategy, and a way to try to balance what the data is telling us with what the perception of experts and practitioners and the public are. So there are some areas that fall outside that within the paper that's clearly articulated. That doesn't mean they're not priorities elsewhere within the system. And I think part of this work as we move forwards will be, where are we covering some of these areas if they aren't in the health and wellbeing strategy, but there is a perception, there's evidence that it is a key challenge. And we need to map that out. I think it's something that we need to talk about, and how that feeds into the integrated care partnership, for example, how it feeds through to different statutory agencies who have responsibilities in these areas. It does get quite complicated. In fact, we'll pick it up a little bit later just in terms of the governance. As Councillor Kendrick will know, oral and dental health is a priority from my perspective, and we are pushing on that, including the opportunities to speak to the Secretary of State around fluoridation, and we'll continue to do that with the support of our councillors and other parties. But we'll do that whether it becomes a health and wellbeing strategy priority area or not.
Yes.
Disagree with you. I really do disagree with you, but I've been coming now to
health and wellbeing forward for a long time, children and young people very rarely feature in the recommendations or a focus on what we should be doing for them. Now, I'm sorry, but they are the future. And, you know, you maybe need to come and go round some of the special schools and you see some of the equipment that these young people will have to live with for the rest of their life. Some of them can't breathe without equipment. And I know I'm probably being dramatic, but I do feel that there should be something in this strategy for young people. Now, I'm not asking, we've got 6 recommendations, I'm not asking for the world, but I am asking for children to be recognised as having some health issues in this county.
Sarah.
Thank you. Just to build on what Councillor has said there, from a mental health point of view, we're very much approaching our alliance as all age. So I guess if we're saying we're going to keep to 7 priorities, I'd be happy if dementia is absorbed in terms of all age, because we're very much considering children and young people's emotional well-being, as well as working age, as well as older adults, and older adult mental illness, as well as dementia, if that allows for another priority to hit the mark, so to speak. So I just want to say, from a health inequalities lens, picking up on children and young people for learning disabilities and autism, I feel that that's where the gap is from a health inequalities lens, and I'm fully cognizant of the process that's been followed, but I do think there is a risk there that it does get sidelined or forgotten about. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, a couple of points. Back to mental health, it's right that it's there as a priority, but within the report on the bottom of page 43, I know it came from the working group, but it said about to address the long terms of COVID, it should be just there under its own merits and not linked into COVID at all as a justification, because it goes much further than COVID. Drugs and alcohol, not entirely comfortable with it being taken off, because I'll disagree with Councillor Bradwell and then I'll agree with her on something else. But, you know, just link, to talk about drugs and alcohol and then just talk about serious violence, it's much more than that. It's linked into an awful lot of mental health issues, wellbeing issues, and there's an awful lot of people that are involved with drugs and alcohol that aren't involved with crime. You know, it's much more than that. So I wouldn't want it just to see it diminished. And that's a general feeling that if it's just looked at by the Safer Lincolnshire, is that looking at it more from a criminality point of view rather than a health view? Because it should be considered as a serious health issue, because it still is that, and it's very much prevalent. And this is where I agree with Councillor Bradwell, because if we bring children into it, if we're dismissing drugs and alcohol as something that's just for Safer Lincolnshire, and well, children are exposed to this as well. So, you know, and that's an ongoing situation, especially with generational drug abuse seen in the home. So, very much concerned that it would be diminished to something that's just to do with safer rather than health. But very much agree with carers. I mean, something was said about carers earlier, wasn't it, in the last paper, but the fact we've still got issues with hidden carers and the amount of value that carers bring to society, both economically and, you know, and from a caring point of view, then it should very much be a priority. But I would ask for consideration about drugs and alcohol before we make that mistake of downgrading it.
Okay, thank you. Derek, and then Glenn.
Just in terms of the drugs and alcohol bit, and then I'll come to children and young people side. One other key driver around our approach in Lincolnshire around drugs and alcohol is the Combating Drugs Partnership now as well, which sits around, it is a national priority. There's a lot of additional spend, but it is very prescriptive. That can, and really comfortable that reports through to here as a senior responsible officer from the Home Office's perspective. So there are nuances here that we could work through. I think one of the challenges is there's lots of different asks from different government departments, and we just need to wrap it all together in some way. In terms of children and young people, I completely accept the challenge. What we've proposed under recommendation 7 is to adopt a life course approach for all of this. So that includes, you know, preconception, perinatal, children, young people, right the way through to the end of life side of it. I think if the Health and Wellbeing Board wants a stronger focus on that as a board, then as officers, of course, we will pick that up and make sure that we do reflect that, and that could absolutely pick up some aspects of SEND. Equally, if Health and Wellbeing Board wants SEND and specific targets within that, then we'll pick that up as officers. It really is a question for the board to give us a steer on that.
Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping to be a unifying force and turning to the housing element of what I hope will be continuing Health and Wellbeing Board priorities. I think it's fair to say that this is an all-age mindset that shapes our housing futures, and also in terms of what does Health and Wellbeing Board add to existing structures. It has to be said that the Housing, Health and Care Delivery Group, or the Homes for Independence Group, is probably a relatively singular vehicle across all of Lincolnshire's partners that provides the opportunity for us to work upstream, as much as it does focus in on people who desperately need housing now, that would be of interest to both health and social care colleagues. It touches all of our agendas, all of our age groups, and if I might indicate the scale of the issue, government estimates are that 80 billion will need to be spent between now and 2030 on retrofitting houses that will be still here in 2050. And Lincolnshire's not at the top of, as it were, the list that says we've got very good housing. We haven't. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Glenn. John.
Thank you, Sue. So a few thoughts from me. Firstly, is I don't think anybody's suggesting that anything that we don't prioritise is somehow unimportant. This is about what we want to prioritise, and it might be helpful just to understand those things that we don't necessarily say are priority. There's still a vast amount of work that's ongoing in relation to them. So I'm looking at things like oral health, respiratory conditions, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. I mean, there already is a huge amount of work going on in these areas, and it will continue going forward. So I don't think we're in some sort of cliff edge sort of thing about in or out in that regard. And everything that has been part of the debate so far has highlighted there's a lot of important issues that we're having to work our way through. I think I am drawn to the work that's already been done, particularly emphasising the high burden and worsening sort of sector on page 49. I think there is some value in sticking with some pre-existing priorities, because you lose momentum and traction if you do dot around quite a lot. For me, I think the way in which the mental health priority has been absolutely highlighted just to mirror all sorts of conversations and discussions that I've been party to over the past number of years, really. So it's really good for Lincolnshire, I think, that it comes through so highly. I think if the drug and alcohol priority is being attended to through other joint mechanisms, we might just want to ensure that we're joined up with that. But I'm not quite sure I see what the case is to bring that under ours if it's being satisfactorily attended to. I hear what Sarah says about dementia and the potential to wrap that in under the sort of broader mental health, all age bit. I think that's probably quite a good shout. If we were to do that, and mental health has so many distinct elements to it, doesn't it? So there would be responsibility, I think, to ensure that within that it wasn't lost. Not that I would think you would be thinking that for one moment, Sarah. Carers, I think there are all sorts of reasons why we might want to maintain that as a priority. I think the figure I spotted earlier, I couldn't see it just flicking through, was something like 79,000 carers in Lincolnshire. That's 1 in 10 of our population, isn't it? That seems pretty significant to me. Selfishly, many of the people who are carers will be our employees as well. So there's something about how we ensure that we support them so they can continue to work for us and support the population of Lincolnshire. I think within that there's a particular issue about young carers, which we might just want to ensure that we've got properly in scope. And finally, for me, housing and health remains, I think, a really significant priority for us. We know that having a safe and healthy house is one of the absolute fundamentals of personal as well as sort of community health as well. So I would be personally supportive of that staying in. I'd like to, minor points, but why Homes for Independence and not some other title? So that would be my thoughts, and completely back the life course approach. That's entirely dovetails in with a whole load of other things and an approach that we're taking. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, John. Any other comments? Alison, just remind me, didn't you say that the drug and alcohol group that Councillor Bradwell's aware of does have health representation on it? Yes. Just to assure Councillor Wright.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Derek.
And just to add to that, the Combating Drugs Partnership, which is where the Home Office are putting the money that's part of the 10-year strategy, is cross-organisational, and I'm the Senior Responsible Officer. Lucy chairs it at the moment because I chair the Northern Lincolnshire one, but that will change over time.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? So I think we need to go through these recommendations one by one in this particular instance, and then probably tack a little bit on the end. So recommendation 1, that there be no more than 7 priorities. I'm not going to die in a ditch over whether it's 7 or whether it's 8 or whether it's 6 or whatever. Derek?
I'd suggest if we go through the other recommendations, that will sort of answer recommendation 1 for us.
All right. Recommendation 2, mental health, emotional well-being, healthy weight, physical activity remain priorities in our strategy. Are we all agreed on that one? Yes? You don't need to show of hands, do you? The next one, that considering aspects of the JSNA fact sheets on homelessness, housing standards and unsuitable homes, and the importance to health inequalities agenda, it's recommended that housing and health remains a priority but is renamed Homes for Independence. Is everybody comfortable with that one? Yeah. As Katrina says, just shout out if you do have an issue. The next one, that a life course approach is taken to reflect the JSNA. Yeah. And then providing a steer on the rest. So, dementia, standalone or part of the mental health priority. Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. So we have a very advanced approach in Lincolnshire to mental health, learning disabilities and autism, which includes dementia, which Sarah leads on as the executive lead. And that includes a very broad range of partners. It's a incredibly useful and well-evolved delivery vehicle for us. And on that basis, it probably works well to recognise that as part of that area of activity.
Yes,
okay, so is everybody else in agreement with that? Anyone not? Oh, thank you. So that's option 2, isn't it? Recommendation number 4, the preferred option for drugs and alcohol. Now, I thought we'd got to option 2, but I'm happy to be persuaded otherwise. Do we agree on option 2? Or rather, does anyone disagree on option 2? Okay, thank you, Councillor Wright. Who agrees on option 2? I think we've got to have a show of hands from the point of view of making a decision. Any abstentions? That's carried overall. And that carers should remain a priority. Is that agreed? Can we just have a show of hands, please? Yeah. Any disagreement? Right. Now, what I'm going to suggest then that Alison goes away and looks at Councillor Bradwell's concerns and suggestions, and that you perhaps have a look at what we can do there. I think Glenn touched on it earlier. It's there's a lot of things that are that's happening and being done in other forum, and there is no point in just adding to something if we've already got a setup that's working very well. But if there is a gap, then we need to fill it. So let's just make sure that we've covered all bases. Thank you. We move on to item 8C, which is the Better Care Fund Planning and Narrative Report for 23-25. And I'm going to hand straight over to you, Glenn, and if you'll just walk us through this paper, please.
Thank you, Chair. So a familiar topic at Health and Wellbeing Board, going back over 7-8 years now. On this particular occasion, something of a novel experience, because for the last 5 years, the Better Care Fund has been rolled forward, which required very little iteration to previous narratives and investment areas. On this occasion, the government has been clear that it expects a 2-year BCF narrative plan, which aligns with a 2-year funding envelope, which will take us up to the next national elections, Chair. Also attached to this report are performance metrics, which we are also reporting regionally and nationally. It should also be noted that on this particular occasion, demand and capacity plans have been subsumed into the Better Care Fund. And this reflects the scale and profile of this particular topic, not just of interest to Andrew and other colleagues, but to ministers personally. I understand that the Minister in Department of Health and Social Care personally reads demand and capacity plans, and also the funding that goes alongside it and what it is delivering. So it has incredibly high profile. That will continue for the remainder of this year and into next. The overall performance in Lincolnshire is good when you look across the piece, though there remain challenges in the system, and that is also part of ongoing work, for example, around intermediate care, discharge and so forth. It's important to note that the deadline for submissions to region for this 2-year BCF narrative on behalf of Lincolnshire has to be submitted formally on the 28th of June. We will hear back from region as to their view of the plan in probably in September, early September, and shortly after in October, at the end of October, all the relevant Section 75 agreements that pool those resources in a number of different areas have to be signed off. We're ahead of the curve in particular on that particular score. I think it's important also to note that members of the board will previously have seen Nikita Lord supporting this particular area of activity as Programme Officer for the BCF in Lincolnshire. I'm pleased to say that following Nikita's departure, a willing applicant to take on the role is Paul Summers, Paul in the corner there, who you will hear from in future reports on the BCF. As with previous BCFs though, this runs through the normal line of approvals, the Chief Executive, John, of the ICB, the County Council, Chief Executive, Portfolio Holder, and of course the Health and Wellbeing Board. So there is no change to the process of approvals, but beyond us, the process of approvals has changed and it no longer goes nationally for approval, it is dealt with at regional level. What you have today is an earlier iteration of a narrative plan that is still being worked on with regional colleagues as a result of their kind offer to proofread all plans. This is a national programme, give feedback so that we continually update it to satisfy relevant requirements. The template, the word count and the content are heavily stipulated at a national level, so there isn't room for manoeuvre. And the other thing to bear in mind is this particular year, the government, this financial year, the government introduced fortnightly reporting against demand and capacity plans, fortnightly reporting, and monthly reporting on the BCF. Those are both new and equally as daunting in terms of the volume of work required, and also quite critical because it's quite clear that government this year is seeking to recover unspent monies. The test of virtue increasingly is now make sure you spend the money and you have hit some targets. You can do one, fail on the other, and you still run the risk of losing quite substantial chunks of money. And when you remember that in the country, some systems only spent 30% of their demand and capacity funding that was allocated in December, given all the pressures and the profile of hospital delays and so forth. Yes, those systems run a grave risk of losing that money where it's most required, it would seem. I'll leave it there, Chair, and take any questions.
Thank you, Glenn. Questions from anyone? Richard.
Thank you, Chair. There's just some questions that have come up, Glenn, with regards to the DFG reports that's in there. So on page 62, we've got that entry that says that it's ring-fence money that must be spent, funding, sorry, that must be paid out to the districts in full unless agreed that the capital fund can be used for other purposes to meet the needs of disabled people. So the question really on that is about checking what are these other needs, who's it agreed by, and what's the framework for that to be transparent so everybody can see it. And which links in really next to the next one, which is the Good Homes Alliance. So having spoken to some colleagues in the room, then we welcome the fact that the Homes for Independent now Living are going to be looking at DFGs, and in fact have encouraged the districts to actually put a separate report together as well to try to demonstrate where there's been good practice and good spend. Because there is, despite Councillor Bokic shaking her head, there are some districts that do really well at this. So I know it's a hot topic, but the wording is just a little bit, shall we say, not drilled into, but to give confidence on where it's going.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Wright. The DFG allocation for the year is 6.9, and that reflects a number of years of growth. The specific allocations to district colleagues was identified in a letter that I signed a few weeks ago, which went to all the chief execs of the districts. which is the full amount that was allocated to Lincolnshire. In terms of other uses, the government guidance is quite clear and remains unchanged over a number of years now, which is that at a system level, if all partners, which includes the ICB, the county council, but critically the 7 districts, agree to pool a quantity of the DFG for a given purpose that they all agree on, they can do so. The actual list of what it can be used for is not limited. And in Lincolnshire, we're incredibly fortunate in having the Housing, Health and Care Delivery Group, because it's the delivery vehicle for those conversations which in other 2-tier areas of the country just don't exist. And of course, it also provides an opportunity for that forum to consider not just the DFGs, but the relationship with equipment budgets, which is a pooled budget, which is also part of the DFG, which the Integrated Care Board, LCHS, and the County Council is part of. So we can see this in the round, and we have a delivery vehicle with all the right partners sitting around the table deciding what's best. And it is a consensual system. If one partner disagrees, we can't pool an element of DFGs. It's that clear. Thank you, Chair. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Emma.
Thank you. Thanks, Glenn. Could I just ask a point of clarification in terms of my role here? I want to make sure that I'm fairly representing voluntary engagement team in particular, who are referenced, I think it's on page 62, and it talks about St Barnabas and Age UK in terms of who's been consulted. And I just want to clarify whether this moment is that moment of consultation, or if there have been other conversations with LVET, and particularly St Barnabas and Age UK outside of this meeting.
Thanks, Chair. Both apply. There have been previous conversations. And if I might, Chair, just take the opportunity to remind members of the Patricia Hewitt review, so-called Hewitt review that was published a couple of months ago, which did stipulate that government should consider spending 1% of NHS budget, which I know that ministers then interpreted as the Better Care Fund, on voluntary sector activity, third sector activity, in support of further preventative work. I very much doubt that we will hear much of that this side of the new national elections, but it should be said that in Lincolnshire, we are planning to spend more in that space than we did in previous years, and it might be a point of interest for this committee in subsequent reports, not just about the BCF, but other areas of funding. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Glenn. Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think I'm on the right page, isn't it? Page 75, the priorities. Just wanted to endorse the priorities, and I would say this, wouldn't I, around the home first and the continued focus on discharges, as well as supporting all the other priorities that are in the plan. And I think it quite rightly says here, still work in progress, going in the right direction, but continued focus needed. And if I'm allowed a sort of second prompt on the priorities, I think the digital one in particular, really, really important, but with a strong focus on the citizen and enabling their digital input, not just the organisational end about what are we going to do, it's how do we empower our people to have much greater control on their information, their data, and how they interact with the rest of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Any other comments or questions? Wendy.
I thought he was ignoring me. Just to come back to Councillor Wright on DFGs. Yes, you wish. I am very passionate about this. Being the chair of the Housing, Health and Care Delivery Group for many years, and now Councillor Gray is, we do see quite a lot of the districts who do not spend all their money, and last year's underspend is where I would like us to seriously consider pooling those budgets. We are doing a pilot on stair lifts at the moment, which will help people get home. I think we should also look at spending it on people who actually own their own houses, because a lot of people own their own houses but are cash poor, and then obviously by putting a charge on the house. But there is lots more that we can do with this DFG and help, like Andrew's just said, get people out of hospital, get them home when they need these adaptations. And yes, some districts do it really well, but others need a little bit of a push. So I just think that's where all of us need to sit around the table and try and spend it wisely.
Thank you, Councillor Burkett. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Better just add further to what Councillor Burkett's just said. We are, Housing Healthcare Delivery are looking in detail at DFG funding, and we're having a workshop. So we have a representative from every district on Housing Healthcare Delivery Group, as you're all aware. We're having a workshop to really bottom out this subject to just see how it can be used better, more efficiently for all sections of our public. So we are having a serious look at DFGs.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Okay, if there are no more comments or questions, then move to the recommendations or the action that's required. We're asked to approve the 23-25 BCF plan and narrative ahead of the submission on the 28th of June. Can I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Burkett. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. All those in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Moving on then to item 8D, and that, I believe, Pete, is you. If I can hand over to you, and if you'll just give an outline of the paper, please.
Yeah, I think, Chair, we should have a presentation that should go live, and I'll quickly run through the slides on that. So we go to the next slide, please. So, action required in the Joint Forward Plan, it came out with the legislation last year which led to the changes in the NHS. And it requires the ICBs and their partner trusts with an integrated care system produce a joint forward plan and refresh it each year. As it's the first year, normally that would be done before the start of the financial year, but as it's the first year, NHSE have given all systems the opportunity to publish it by the end of June, but they must link in with the ICP's Health and Wellbeing Board and NHS England in terms of the development process and in terms of when it's published and getting their views on it. Because we have the ICP and the Health and Wellbeing Board membership together is come here today for that part. The guidance, unlike a lot of NHS guidance, does offer significant flexibility to local systems to determine how they shape and what's covered in their joint forward plan. So when they are published across the country, there will be marked difference between different approaches by different system, which is entirely appropriate to what's being discussed there. The approach is determined by the ICB and its partner trusts, and really its aim is to focus on how it meets the needs of its local population health, physical and mental health needs in that sense. But key from today is making sure actually does the Health and Wellbeing Board believe what the areas we're trying to cover in the Joint Forward Plan meet the needs of our local population and address what's in the JSNAs. Next slide, please. So just to be clear, those certainly those watching live, members of the public, there are 3 strategies at a system level that have developed. There's a 4th, which we'll cover in the part of the ICP paper. They are the Joint Health and Wellbeing Board strategy that is being refreshed but currently exists. They're the Integrated Care Partnership strategy, the interim that was agreed at the end of last year and published in January, and now there's the Joint Forward Plan. So the aim is to obviously the Health and Wellbeing Board strategy was written before the ICP strategy, but the aim we're trying to do is make sure actually there's commonality and linkages between all 3, but there are differences at the same time. So all 3 strategies have the same ambition and aims, and then we've broken it down. The Health and Wellbeing Board strategy is the what are the health needs in the population and what are the kind of areas that are going to be focused, as we've just discussed. The ICP strategy then is about the integrated care approach and how the third sector, care sector, NHS, local authority, district councils as partners all come together to say, how can we integrate our approach to kind of address some of those key health issues? And where the joint forward plan is really what the NHS focus is on for the next 5 years in terms of how we address elements of the JSNAs and where we're going to focus our attention in terms of moving forward on them as a collective unit. So that when you see it, that's why it's more NHS focused, because the other parts are picked up in the other documents. Next step. So in developing the joint forward plan, we had a steering group set up, had Health Watch, members of the public on, all the NHS organisations, County Council and the PCN Alliance as members, and the aim was to shape the kind of process going through that. We undertook some initial engagement. We had sections with the public, which I'll cover in the next slide briefly. We met with clinical and professional groups within the NHS, so Primary Care Advisory Group, the Clinical Directorate, and we also had sessions within each NHS organisation to determine what the kind of key priorities are. And they were inputs into a workshop we had in March to look at kind of the priorities for the NHS, and I'll touch on that in a couple of slides. Next slide, please. In terms of local engagement, we worked with Health Watch, and we should be clear here, this is not extensive engagement, the timescales haven't done that, and I'll touch on that at the end, but we tried to make sure that when we started off on this journey, we at least had some input from the public as part of that. So our NHS engagement team, working with Health Watch, went out to a number of community groups, ran a number of webinars, and also had an online survey to try and address what people's views are on the priorities in the NHS, and where we should be focusing on in the next 5 years, what we need to kind of address going forward. So we're not saying this is all encompassing engagement, but we're trying to get some sense of public view ahead of just going down a track of what our priorities would be locally, and they fed into the workshops that take place, which I'll cover next. So in terms of developing the plan, we had two workshops. The first workshop took the feedback we had from the public, took the feedback we had from the professional organisations and the trusts into, and had Derek present on what the JSNAs are and what the health needs are for the population, then looked at what the priorities are and kind of worked through how many priorities do we want for the NHS to focus on the next 5 years. Not saying that other areas not captured won't be worked on, but what are the core priorities we want to capture in this document? And that workshop kind of determined 5, which I'll touch on later. From the end of that session, we then formulated working groups from people within the NHS across all organisations to focus on each of the 5 priorities, and outside as well, because Derek was involved on this Living Well, Staying Well agenda piece, and to look at how do we move these forward, what do we need to cover, what's the broad area we want to focus on in each of those priorities. That work was undertaken, and then those people presented back at a second workshop at the end of April to the similar kind of cohort of people. And I should say those workshops have members of the public, County Council itself, Chair, NHS organisations, voluntary sector, all around the table to kind of hear the feedback. And they were presented back to that workshop, and there's kind of check and challenge, confirm and challenge what's in there, what might we want to change from that session. And then that information was taken to hone the document that we are now, and the priorities that we are now out engaging, including today on. So I'll go through what's now in the document, and then I'll step on the next steps going forward. So if we go to the core of our joint forward plan is what we consider is our strategy for Lincolnshire. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Is key to this, and the heart of the document all the way through it is a new relationship with the public. And this is work that's been undertaken coming out of COVID and over the past 2 years, in terms of actually how does the NHS change its approach in working with the people we serve, how do we do that in a more joined up way, and there's 5 kind of core principles highlighted on here, which I won't read through them all, but being prepared to do things differently in the NHS, understand what matters to ourselves and each other, and having those conversations with people, not about people. It's just crucial within this is that actually our focus, and it came out of the first workshop, was that new relationship is key. And it's something that's going to take a long time. It's a cultural change programme. It's not we'll put this service in here and address a need. It's something that we're going to have to take a long time to work with people across the county in all different areas to kind of move this forward. But that's at the heart of the strategy. Next slide. And underneath that, then there was 5 priorities identified and 3 themes That still need further development, but the 5 priorities are that new relationship with the public, living well and staying well, and that's around the prevention element, improving access to health services, integrated community care and that kind of care close to home model, and a happy and valued workforce. And alongside that, we had our focus, and it came out of that workshop one, was that work on integration and making sure actually patients, it's a seamless health and care service. Patients don't see the kind of handoffs as they sometimes do. Focus on excellence in everything we do, so not just in the care we provide, but in the meals we provide, the cleaning we do take place, the approach everyone has, and having that installed across. And then innovation, and looking to how do we innovate our care, how do we learn from best practice, and how do we become frontrunners in some of the care we provide. So we're just going to touch now on what's in each priority. Just go forward to the next slide, please. So in a new relationship, one is focused on creating that shared agreement, that approach, that cultural change programme we want with the citizens in the county, and how we do that collectively. But within that, it's around supporting shared decision making. So it isn't just Dr. knows best, but it's a joint what matters to that person and their carers and their families. How we develop and design services together, and how we work with families and carers on their own health and wellbeing and support them to maintain that. That then ties in nicely to the living well, staying well, so the preventative approach. We've already had some feedback on this. Actually, we should take the ages off, because certain people will be at different stages in the health cycle. Something that we'll look to look at. But that kind of healthy life cycle approach, and how you do prevention at different stages to address the population needs and help people stay healthier for longer. Next slide, please. In terms of priority 3 and 4, access is developing services to align to population health, the population needs, and we know that different communities have different health needs in the county, and therefore ensuring that the range of skills and expertise provided in those services meet the local health need, and simplify the process for access and healthcare, and better understanding how those populations can access healthcare in the right way. And that ties in what we just had. How do we put into the next one around integrated community care? How do we make care provided where possible? Because not all care can be provided close to home, but close to people's homes and communities. And that's around improving primary care services, simplifying that kind of additional support, and the integrated workforce model out in the community across, not just in this is the NHS document, but we recognise it's health and care in the voluntary sector in that process. And then finally, it's around our workforce, and this work already exists and is ongoing, around valuing and growing our own people, and developing our people and retaining them. And that ties in with the ICP strategy as well, around the workforce element. So they're the kind of core priorities in the document. I'm just going to quickly then touch on what we're doing now, and then the next steps and next slide. So we're currently out running a very mini engagement activity over the 2 weeks. This is the second week. I think we're going out to 24 community groups across 13 locations in the county. A number of kind of webinars, both with staff groups as well as members of the public. We're coming here, we're going to Health Scrutiny tomorrow, and we're going to continue to do that, which I'll touch on next. But that's what we're undertaking at the moment, to try and make sure there is some engagement in terms of goes into the document. But in terms of the next steps, though, we don't see the publication in June as the final point. There's more work to be done in this area, so we're going to continue to engage on the document in the summer and into the autumn. We're going to develop the kind of underpinning elements for each priority going forward, reflecting that kind of engagement that take place, and we'll kind of map out what our kind of key steps are, milestones are over the coming years, and that will be also, as we refresh the document each year, that will then feed into that process. So that's the process we've gone to today. They're the areas we're looking to cover, and we welcome people's feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Any questions or comments from anyone? Oh, you're going to get away with this slightly. I think you are. Okay, the actions required are that we note the report, and the requirement for the NHS to deliver a joint forward plan, the requirement to involve the Health and Wellbeing Board in preparing or revising the joint forward plan, and we're asked to give an opinion on whether the joint forward plan takes proper account of the joint local health and wellbeing strategy. Well, I think we can all agree on that, can't we? Yes, Derek?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the two documents together fit together in the same way that the Health and Wellbeing Board and then the Integrated Care Partnership fit together for Lincolnshire. And covering two councils in the north as part of 6 with an ICB, that is not always the case. And I think Pete would agree, we will develop the two together as we go, and it comes back to that point about all priorities are not going to be in any one document, but it's the spread and depth of them, I think.
Thank you, Derek. Can I have a show of hands? Does everyone agree that with the recommendations and the actions? Thank you. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Moving on to item 9A is the annual assurance reports. Again, I'm going to assume that everyone's read these, but I'm going to invite Alison if you will present the report and invite any comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I don't intend to go through every one of the appendices because there's a lot of information contained in there. So yeah, I'm assuming that you've had a chance to glance across them. We have a commitment to bring an annual assurance report from each of the priority areas in the Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy to the board at its AGM. The appendices provide an update on what activity each of the priority delivery groups have undertaken over the past 12 months, and also gives an overview of their plans for the coming year as well. So welcome any comments. They offer information. If I can't answer the question, I'll obviously take it back to the relevant priority lead and come back with any answers for any that I can't cover today.
Thank you, Alison. Any comments or questions? Anyone? No? John?
If I may, if I may, I think there's some really good material actually in the pack here. I just wonder whether we should make more of it in terms of just informing our staff and the people we serve about the range of, and our partners about the range of work that's being undertaken. Just looking through it recently when the papers came out, I thought that actually is some pretty impressive stuff there. And obviously our job is to just acknowledge all of that this afternoon. But in terms of answering the what are you, the Romans, ever done for us sort of question, there's a vast amount of material in here. Always more to be done, of course, but some brilliant work to continue to promote and build on. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, John. And I won't take any of the credit. It all goes that way. So, but thank you, you and the team. It's a very comprehensive report. Derek.
Just picking up on John's point, I wonder whether we should take an action, Alison and I, to speak to our comms team and do something quite high level, but also maybe a short couple of pages that we can share with all of the statutory organisations and wider partners so that they can brief out about all of the work that has been done and how it ties back to the original prioritisation framework and the work of this board and others.
Yep, that would be great. Thank you. We're asked to note and comment. Have we noted? Can I have a show of hands if we're all in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Moving on to item 9B, when I can find it. Is the evaluation of the integrated lifestyle service, One New Lincolnshire. Well, I was going to say, but he's not here. Presumably you're going to speak to this report, Derek.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Woolley. It's really just for information to the Health and Wellbeing Board, given it fits within the wider strategy and the priorities we've got. And it's an example that we've actually just highlighted to the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities about how for the past 4 years we've been working collectively between the councils and the NHS at that point, the CCGs when this first started, to address one of our key priority areas. So I wasn't going to go through it in detail. suffice to say, the details there, but the university carried out an independent evaluation, which basically shows that the service is outperforming all of the national benchmarks.
Yes, thank you for that. I think you did actually mention the word. I think the importance of it being an independent evaluation really does add weight to it, and please take a message back to the university that I'm very grateful to them, although I expect they charged us for it, didn't they? Okay, any other comments or questions? First of all, Emma, and then Councillor Wright, and then John.
Thank you. Brilliant to see the report and the impacts. I think I was particularly interested, of course, in the physical activity strand of it, and speaking to physical activity providers who One New Lincolnshire refer into. I think when it comes to the renewal of the contract, there could be some helpful conversations and insight that we can bring from the physical activity sector side in terms of that referral process, and also what we do beyond the 12 weeks and how we make sure that there is some more formal way of ensuring that clients are engaged beyond the 12-week period. And I think when we look at the statistics, the prioritisation of physical activity in the JSNA, the number of the population that are inactive versus the number that One New Lincolnshire are reaching, it's about how we can enhance and build out that service through greater connectivity, I think, outside of the direct referral service. So yeah, just really keen to help that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's some really good stuff in here. It's been really successful from delivery take-up. Good to see a report that actually measures outcomes and not inputs. I recently chewed the Home Office over that one. Because it's not about inputs, is it? It's what would we achieve on the other end of it. So very good. There's a couple of questions though. One was regards to alcohol, and it said there was fewest referrals because the GP's prioritisations of other referral pathways. So it'd be interesting to see what the data is from GPs with regards to this, because we do have across a large part of Lincolnshire still an ingress of people of an age who aren't necessarily working, who spend a lot of time or more time socialising, shall we say. And so it is still an issue, and I think it's an issue that we import. And it'd be interesting to see how that's dealt with, because it is prevalent out there, but it's not always seen as an issue, is it? Alcohol's not seen as the same issue as drugs and substances, so an interesting one. And then the other one was about the 38% of referrals from the 30% most deprived communities. There's a reason given for that to do with service reconfigurations, but interesting to see what will be the work going forward to try to get that back up again to where it's targeted at 50%.
Derek, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, in terms of the alcohol referrals, absolutely agree. Worth bearing in mind that within the One New Lincolnshire approach, it's low level alcohol substance misuse, and then obviously if the addiction is higher, then it will get referred through to the substance misuse and alcohol services. We are with you, Ron. In terms of the targeting at the most deprived communities, that was always part of the course specification. COVID had a big impact, as you would expect, and it is absolutely one of the areas that we're working really closely with the provider and wider colleagues and partners around. And this does dovetail, as Emma's already said, into a much wider piece of work, including the District Council's health and wellbeing strategy that they've developed because of the overlap with some of these services. But I think I'll just come back to Emma's point about this is touching the sides, but just. And fundamentally, if, for example, physical activity was a drug, everybody would be prescribed it. And the challenge for the world, but certainly the developed economies, is how do we scale this up? And I think that's going to be one of the big challenges for the next health and wellbeing strategy, is how do we keep building on this and scale it up? And it comes back to things like the Hewitt Review and other areas like that, because this is going to be a cost-saving intervention for the system, not just a cost-effective one.
Thank you, Derek. John.
Emma just wants to come back first.
Emma.
Yeah, just to further build on Derek's point, I think that's exactly where I'm coming from. It's the sustainability of these programmes beyond the 12-week intervention, recognising the challenge that community and voluntary and charity sectors face. So just for an example, I was talking to Jubilee Park, and One Year Lincolnshire would pay them £35 for a member to access their services for 12 weeks. And within that, there's a whole host of administration. And actually, when we've got the fuel crisis and, you know, the cost of pools keeping their doors open and things, actually there's almost a challenge back to the sector in terms of affordability of them being able to support these kind of programmes. So I think there's a much bigger picture that we need to start to better understand so that we can support the sector effectively to provide the services that people like One Year Lincolnshire want to prescribe into.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair comment, Emma. Thank you. John.
Thank you, Sue. Actually, the main point, actually, Emma and Derek have just taken the conversation forward I was going to make. But firstly, this is a really good evaluation, isn't it? And actually really good that our university has done the evaluation for us. And I think it is encouraging that it evaluates comparatively well against similar approaches elsewhere in the country. That is a positive. I was going to ask a question about whether the size of the solution here is big enough given the size of the problem, but you've taken that conversation forward a bit, and Derek, is touching the sides, but only just sort of response. Sort of, I think, says it all in terms of what's in my mind as well. So I think there's more work for us to do around this as we roll it forward. And then a specific point about GPs, and perhaps I, Derek, with your support, I need to take this back through with our GP colleagues just in terms of their awareness and engagement with it on behalf of their registered population. It might also be something that's worth engaging with our community pharmacists about as well, potentially. So we'll take that one away, Sue. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? Okay, well, we will just ask you to note the contents of the report. Can I just have a show of hands for agreeing? Seen it, thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Okay, the next item is the action log of previous decisions on pages 265 to 268, merely for noting. Everybody content with those? Thank you. And then finally, this board, that the forward plan, which was circulated with the agenda on 269 to 271, and again is for noting. Everyone content with that? But of course, if there's any items that you'd wish to put on the forward plan, please let Alison or Katrina know. Thank you. On that note then, I close the meeting. Shall we have a 10-minute break, and then we'll go straight back into the integrated. Oh. The next meeting apparently doesn't start until 4 o'clock, and it's a public meeting, and so we will have to stick to the times. I'm sorry, I didn't think about that. I was expecting it to go on to the back, so I needn't have rushed. We could have chatted longer. Thanks very much for your participation in this meeting.